Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I'm Larry.
I'm Don.
And I'm Josh. And for the very first time, we have a longtime fan on our panel. He and I have been speaking for, I want to say, about 6 years now. We've been doing the channel since 2014. By the time it comes up, it'll be 7 years that we've been speaking. Don, it is a delight to have you on board.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Is there anything that you would want people to know about you? I know you are a blogger and also a poet.
Yeah. I'm a poet from Albany, New York. I write a blog for Albany Poet, which is this website about poetry happenings in Albany plus different things. But my book blog is, I call it The Next Chapter, is on www.albanypoets.com.
Already.
And then I'm also on Bookstagram, bookish area of Instagram.
Okay. I've read some of your posts from The Next Chapter, and I really appreciated your the shout out the one time that you gave based off of the way I conduct my book hauls.
Well, you're welcome. Always glad to give a shout out to people who I like and who are equally like books as much as I do.
Absolutely. I think that we do need more avid readers. I think that, and people that are very critical and elaborate with how they approach the written word. Today, we're going to be going over a play. We're going to be going over a playwright that Larry and I fought over back in season 12. So this is round number 2. We're going over Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco. Along with The Bald Soprano, those are probably his two most familiar plays. Eugene Ionesco is an absurdist playwright. He and Samuel Beckett are often spoken alongside one another. The discussion starter that I have for this is, Rhinoceros is a play in which a society is being terrorized by a rhinoceros, but as the play progresses, citizens of their society, and assumingly throughout the country and maybe even beyond, are becoming rhinoceroses. What do you believe the rhinoceros stands for? Is the rhinoceros and the transformations even the most interesting part of the play?
I guess I'll take a crack at that. I think the rhinoceroses are representative of a kind of mob psychology or something like along those lines, that is kind of like being swept up in some kind of movement, whatever that movement may be. I don't think it matters much. It's like that. It's like people becoming wrapped up and then changed by some kind of movement, like by some zeitgeist or something like that.
I agree with you, Larry, as far as the aspect of conformity is concerned, and how the rhinoceroses are representative of this seed that's being planted, people feeling that they need to conform to. First, somebody becomes interested in that train of thought, follows it, and then as more and more people get involved, people feel the need to conform. I think that there are multiple meanings as far as the rhinoceros is concerned, but I think that human psychology is even more.
I agree with both of you guys. Definitely is a take on mob. I don't know if you want to say hysteria, but everyone joining in saying, okay, this makes sense, even though we're giving up our individuality, to become this one thing, become rhinoceroses. It's also, okay, our humanity part of something bigger, which is a fascinating idea. When I read it in high school, I sort of missed the whole point of that. I thought, oh, this is a funny play about people who turned into rhinoceroses. But learning later on, like Ionesco was interested in like how people became fascists, how people became Nazis. I think there is a deeper meaning to the rhinoceros.
There is that idea that there's something that tempts a good few of them, and then it just floods into tempting the entirety of them. But it's also that survival instinct. They ask themselves, what happens if we do not become part of this group thing? No matter which way you put it, it is that sense of human psychology feeling the need to belong, and that if you're on the outside looking in, you're at a greater disadvantage. The other thing that really interested me was how Ionesco looks at the way that humans act with one another, because the whole scene in the cafe and the very first encounter the rhinoceros. First of all, I think it was brilliant the way that he executed the two conversations going on at one time between Jean and Berenger, as well as the logistician. You had him, you had a few other people involved in those discussions. And then there was when the first disaster takes place that killed the housewife's cat, you also had a third conversation going on between her and the waitress was comforting her. I see a lot of that reflection in the way that they approach when you have a shooting, and how a lot of people will act on the surface where it's thoughts and prayers, okay, move right along. In this case, they even go into detail. Instead of pretty much demonstrating genuine sympathy for the woman and the cat who died, they're more concerned about what kind of rhinoceros was it? How many horns did it have?
Yeah, that does sound a lot like it, right? Where on social media, especially whenever there's some kind of shooting or something like that, everybody wants to know, well, what was his political view, right? That's like the first thing everybody kind of jumps to on both sides, right? Whether you're conservative or Democrat or whatever you are, that seems to be something that everybody wants to know right away. It's even more important than the fact that something tragic has happened.
That, or what kind of mental problems did they have? We need to strengthen gun control.
Yeah, and the politicization of it too.
Yes, it becomes politicized, and it's kind of like a clue setup where you deal the cards and it's just who's the shooter, where did they go, and what did they use. This play really harps upon that, and like Don said, it may have on the surface level been created out of humor, and in a way there were things that were hysterical. However, this is very deep. This is a very deep play.
Yeah, I would agree. I like this one a lot better than the first one that we did. I think that this one is more grounded in something a little bit more real. I mean, we could tell that Ionesco is still as critical of an objective kind of reality as he is in The Bald Soprano, but still, this one is getting at something I think that is actually true.
I will agree with you that this is more grounded, and I think that there's greater structure as far as being able to depict life in a little less trivial of a matter. However, I do think that both of the plays are intended to get somewhere. Ionesco's writing both of them with a direction in mind, but this one is a bit firmer. It's a firmer bridge.
Yeah. I think that this one is getting somewhere real, right? Like, as I said in our previous discussion on The Bald Soprano, I disagree with his philosophy going into that play altogether. But this one, it's not as broad, and it's making me kind of reevaluate Ionesco. And I wonder now, looking back at The Bald Soprano, whether or not that is more of a critique of England than I first gave a look at, right? Because Ionesco himself is a French Romanian. So I wonder if that was meant to be more critical of England. I'd have to look at it again and try to reevaluate it. But yeah, reading this play has definitely given me a greater appreciation for this playwright.
Great, that I've always had an appreciation for Ionesco. Bald Soprano was written in the early 50s. I want to say this one, it was first produced in Paris. It was January 25th, 1960. And then in London, April 28th, 1960. I think that the play was written around that time, not a little bit earlier.
Rhinoceros, wasn't it like 1959 when it was published?
That makes sense.
It's been a long time. I remember I read another Ionesco play, and I'm not sure if I read The Bald Soprano. I think it might have been The Chairs. Right, this one, it seems very direct. You sort of understand the whole concept of what the rhinoceroses are, what Berenger is up against, especially in the end of the play.
Berenger has people surrounding him. They transform one by one. Daisy's the last person to make the transformation, because it seems like the two of them are going to go, they're going to take the world on together, but she very quickly starts to have second thoughts. And even Berenger himself has second thoughts, but he becomes grounded, will stand as long as he's able against the...
It sort of reminded me of that whole thing. They came for the Jews and I didn't speak up, and so they came for someone else, and then I was the only one standing, and no one was there to speak up for me. I think Berenger is in that position because he's the last human, at least in that area, at least where he lives. And so he, I guess, feels like he has to stand up for humanity, no matter
Yeah,
what will happen to him.
that and what is right, because if we're taking the rhinoceros as what the rhinoceros did at the beginning of the play, as what a rhinoceros does, that means what they are conforming to is an act of hurting and killing other people or killing other living beings. Just because they're conforming doesn't mean what they're doing is morally right. I think we can gather the fact that the choice comes down to whether or not you want to make the accepted decision or the decision that's morally correct. The accepted decision is the one that assures you a place in society, whereas doing what is correct comes with its risks. I think that what Berenger did is the admirable thing, even if it may not benefit him.
And this surprises me, okay, kind of based on my impression of Ionesco based on the last play, but we see a real critique, I think, of moral relativism here, where we have the conversation between John and was it Berenger in John's place, right, where John is becoming more sympathetic to the rhinoceroses and saying things like, well, who are we? You know, who are we to say what's right and wrong? What's that? And we see that as soon as he starts to take on that attitude, he starts to become more animalistic, more of a rhinoceros himself, as he's abandoning, you know, what he is so grounded in the beginning, or what he appears to be, right? Which is like, oh, you know, you shouldn't drink so much, you shouldn't be late, you shouldn't, you know, he's very grounded in a kind of an objective idea of what morality is. And as that starts to slip, he starts to become more of an animal.
I thought it was sort of interesting that as the play progressed, like at first people are like with John, he's hesitant at first to accept the rhinoceroses, but then he eventually becomes one. And then Dudard later on is like, oh, I'm fine with them. As time goes on, oh, well, they're not so bad. I think people rationalize things like that. Oh, well, they're not that bad.
Dudard's transformation was very suspicious because he was throwing red flag after red flag. They wanted to invite him to dinner, but he had declined. But then he ran off and was gone for good. By the fourth act, it was just the three of them. Everybody else had made a transition by that time, because you had the people that Berenger worked with in the second part, but aside from Daisy and Dudard, all of them had either already transformed, or actually, yeah, they probably already transformed by the fourth part. John transformed in the third part. The older couple didn't at that time, but we can assume that by the fourth part that they did, because it was just Berenger.
We get a sense too of that alienation that he's feeling at the end there. It's a real kind of sad thing, and he's basically wanting to be, you know, an individual, which is fine and good, but you know, I wouldn't be exactly where I would have gone with it, but it's good enough, I guess, right? It makes the point.
Very often does doing the right thing prove to be alienating.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's true.
And what's interesting is Berenger is an alcoholic at the start of the play. He's not a perfect person.
No.
And he has to surmount, make a decision on whether he's going to go with the rhinoceros or not, if he's going to stay human.
Yep. That is an interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's someone who's not necessarily the voice of reason. He does have that meek disposition. What they say about the meek is that they're the ones that inherit the earth. It was Jean that was more the voice of reason. Everybody else surrounding them was either a supporting cast member or the logician. I think he was a little bit more absurd. The way that he spoke logic was just taking things for their face value, and they were very mathematical.
Yeah, but also bad, right? Like his logic, he was not a good logician by any stretch. I don't know if that's intentional or if that's meant to critique logic itself, or if it's meant to critique people that are bad at logic. It's hard to say.
The way that logic is approached academically and viewed as far as the way that society views intelligence, I think that that's where Ionesco is getting at, because he is an absurdist playwright, and absurdity sees logic in a very creative but a very eye-opening way.
Yeah, I don't know, right? All I know is that the logician is spewing bad logic, like that syllogism that he comes up with about the cat, right? Where Socrates, all cats die Socrates is dead, therefore Socrates is a cat. That's a bad it's a bad syllogism, right? So I mean,
Yes.
you're not really critiquing logic there. You're just coming up with a bad syllogism. So if his intent is to critique logic, he could.
If anything, that's more of a mockery of logic.
It's just bad. It's just a bad
because
argument.
we all know Socrates is not a cat.
Right. And it does not follow, right? The conclusion does not follow from the premise that just because all cats die does not mean that everything that dies is a cat. It's bad logic. If he's meaning to critique logic there, he's doing a bad job of it. He's not giving an example of good logic.
That's probably what, in part, what Ionesco was satirizing in this play, the way people rationalize these things to an absurd point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that comes across is that logic can be done badly, and yet it can seem convincing, but yet not be true from an argumentative standpoint. But that's not to say that logic is not valuable and good.
It also touches upon who is viewed as being a voice of reason and a voice of logic. Just because somebody is an expert in a certain field doesn't make them the ultimatum, be it a doctor or a scientist.
Right. Like somebody's graduating last in their class. So
or like the internet today.
Yes.
People think that everything is fake news that doesn't agree with what they believe in. That's very easy to do. Oh, well, that doesn't fit my set of values. It's fake news. I don't believe in it.
People are engaged in confirmation bias, often driven by Facebook memes.
Oh, exactly. We all see it all the time. There are groups on Facebook dedicated to they believe that the earth is flat, even though there's evidence there isn't. That's not it.
No, and they can make arguments that sound convincing even though they aren't actually logical, right? That's the thing. Also, I wanted to go back just a little bit where we were talking about Berenger and how he is in the beginning, right? And he's drinking. But then he decides, that he is going to change, right? I think that's an interesting aspect of it. He wants to change, but then all around him, one by one, everybody else becomes, a rhinoceros. Part of me wonders if that's part of this, like if Ionesco is looking at this as a subjective kind of thing. Is it from Berenger's standpoint that everybody is changing?
I think that he's also touching upon the fact that I think that making forward progress as a person and being able to acknowledge what you've done is wrong and do better is better than being a generally decent person and then becoming a conformist of the wrong cause.
I don't think it stands what I'm saying, but I still think it's kind of interesting. And while I was reading the play, I was wondering if Ionesco was going there, whereas he's the one changing, and so he is noticing things in other people that he did not previously noticed. That maybe they've been rhinoceroses all along. Now, I don't think that's where he was going, but I just thought that the fact that he is wanting to transform himself in the beginning of the play it's an interesting element that's put in there that kind of makes you possibly wonder about that kind of thing.
You could approach this play in so many different ways. I think that it touches upon so many different areas, but I think that this is more about human psychology and the way they respond to society as opposed to the physical transformation from human to rhinoceros. I mean, it's also interesting that they use the rhinoceros as opposed to something like an elephant because the rhinoceros is it's less attractive per se than the elephant. It leads by the horn instead of the trunk. If you really want to think, the rhinoceros always has the bird on them. Not only are they big, bulky, and abrasive and dangerous, but they also are not thinking for themselves.
Like
Yeah.
You think of elephants, right? There's a degree of intelligence that we kind of accredit to elephants. There's no such association with a rhinoceros, right? Rhinoceros is just seen as kind of a dangerous, charging menace.
In society's way. I'd like to do more animal research. We do place a lot of stereotypes on different animals. Pretty much anything you could find on a farm is depicted in a negative light, depicting people as either stupid, reckless, homely, that kind of thing. I think that there's more beyond that. As far as the stereotypes about rhinoceroses are concerned, then that's a logical way to think that would be, or that's a correct way.
Yeah. I think that's why he might have chosen them.
Do we have any final thoughts?
I think you could find it on YouTube. There is a movie based on Rhinoceros with Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. I mean, the special effects are not that great, considering it was in the 70s. It's an interesting take on the whole play.
I think it's Gene Wilder that plays Bernard. What's the name? The Behringer, right?
You might be right. I haven't seen it in decades.
I'd have to check. I would have thought that Zero Mostel, but then again, Zero Mostel's a little bit more. I remember he was a guest on the Muppet Show. Gene Wilder, I thought, would have that Jean personality, but then again, he could also be Behringer because he's a very versatile actor.
He does a real good job. Gene Wilder does a really good job with coming across like desperate, like in Young Frankenstein, right? That whole role that he plays there, he's so over the top, and I think that might serve the character of Behringer pretty well.
Like in The Producers, where he's a little hysterical, and he and Zero Mostel were a perfect team anyway. I just wanted to throw it out there, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube.
The way that they set up the play, they just wear the rhinoceros head. Everything below the neck is just part of a costume. They explain it in here, according to stage direction. It's just a lot of rhinoceros heads. That's how they credit them. So when they make the transformation, it's just they probably in the films they probably do something cheesy special effects. But
from what I remember,
there is actually a stage production available on YouTube as well. That's pretty well done, and how they chose to deal with it. They say that Ionesco is avant-garde, right? So I mean, that word has been pretty meaningless to me until today. Actually, when I saw this play, I'm like, oh, that's what avant-garde is. Like in the stage production, right? The things that are happening in this play are very difficult to pull off. People falling from windows and things like that. You can see how they do that. At least in this version, it's really interesting. It's on YouTube
because those transformations have to be a little bit realistic.
The way they chose to do it in this production was it's all off stage. Every transformation happens off stage.
That would be probably the best way to do it on Broadway, because even when they did Elephant Man, you never saw Elephant Man was always off stage, but they changed that when it was adapted in the film, which you have a little bit more leeway.
Oh yeah.
If they maybe
because I've seen footage of David Bowie playing the when he was in the Elephant Man, and he looked like big David Bowie. They extra makeup on him.
Yeah,
he definitely has a walk and that kind of thing.
That'd be quite something to see him playing that role, because
I gather he was well appreciated for it. It was like a big thing when he did take on that role.
I'll have to look into that one.
But not most people made it to Broadway.
On the basis of Rhinoceros, the Spider-Man villain, Rhino, I think that if they made him look like that could probably come off pretty well, because Rhino the villain had the rhinoceros head and a pretty rhinoceros-built-like body, but it was still structured like a human, but very hunched and muscular, and it was all grayish.
It's been a long time since I saw that movie. I still remember what you mean. I think if you did the movie today, there would be a lot of CGI effects, and sometimes that takes away from, because it's not real. So I sort of like the cheesy effect.
Yeah, I would say that much is true.
Yeah, I prefer things to be done the old-fashioned way myself in movies. Makeup, in-camera effects, that kind of thing. Not a big fan of all the CGI.
It all depends on what it's being used, but yeah, I think as far as animation is concerned, there's something charming about the classic animation as opposed to what we see in CGI, even though it's easier to put together. The Pixar, I think, was the revolutionary force, but the things that I've seen through Pixar have been quite nice. How would we rate Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco? 0 to 5 stars, half stars permitted. Larry?
Let's see. I'm gonna go 3.5. I really enjoyed this one, and I wasn't expecting to, so I'm gonna go pretty high with it. I'm gonna go with the 3.5. I think that this is relevant always, because there's always some piece of mass hysteria or mob psychology at work that's just ready to take off, as far as I could tell. So I think that this is kind of a timeless piece that does a pretty good job of showing the dangers of what can happen very quickly.
I sort of would give it maybe 4 out of 5 stars. It's funny because when I think of it, I also think of Waiting for Godot, and I think I like this play much better than for Godot because there's not much that happens. And I know there's a lot going on. There's a lot to read into. Yeah, because I was saying with Waiting for Godot, there wasn't much to look into it. But there's different levels right now.
Yeah, we lost him.
Hopefully he comes back on. My rating for this book is perfect 5 stars. I gave The Bald Soprano perfect 5 stars, and I think that if The Bald Soprano is the perfect comic relief, I think Rhinoceros is the perfect straight man. The Bald Soprano it approached a eye-opening subject so eccentrically and zanily. This one did the same thing, only while incorporating humor, it also provided us with such a deep under the skin message. I think that Ionesco's plays are definitely worth studying. I definitely want to continue read and examine them even more. I think that he's a remarkable playwright, and I think this is one of the best things that I've read this year thus far, and by that I mean 2021. That would be last year. If you're interested, here is my copy. This collection includes Rhinoceros, The Leader, and The Future is in Eggs, or It Takes All Sorts to Make a World.
Of course, that's the name of his collection.
Yeah, Ionesco, he doesn't really want his plays to be viewed as literature, yet anybody that examines absurdist plays is going to make mention to him and what he's had to offer. We want to thank Don for taking part in our discussion. Don Levy is a longtime fan and a great guy. I hope you tune in for some more discussions. These upcoming discussions are going to be in person. Be sure to join us next time on another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Hi, I'm Dan from Literary Gladiators, and next time we'll be talking about a personal favorite of mine by Frank Miller, Sin City. As you can see, my copy's pretty big. Join us next time, and if you like what we do here, consider joining us on Patreon and subscribing to our channel. Until next time, keep reading.